My impressions of 2020. It sucks ass. Let me start that over. Okay. You're not going to ask questions, I just start talking. Loose association. Great. Alright. My impressions of 2020. It sucks ass.
You know, when it first started, and I was at work flying people around and the world was sort of falling apart and everyone was going to their collective holes and I couldn't find any toilet paper online. Before I got home, I remember thinking that I had enough toilet paper for about 2 months, and it crossed my mind that maybe I would have to graduate to newspaper and then perhaps rocks. And I remember thinking, is this like the apocalypse that everyone talks about? And when we talk about millennials not knowing where food comes from vis-a-vis the grocery store, is this the moment that all comes down to? And I thought, yes, this is the moment. Or it could be anyway. Not necessarily, but it could be. And I ordered a lot of rice and beans on Amazon and came home.
That was just very surreal to have this huge thing be going on that we're all doing everything we can to avoid, and then have it just show up in your home. And we just knew so little then that it was scary. We didn't really know much about the virus at that point. So luckily we were all fine. My mom was really, really sick and refused to go to the hospital. So that was just, I was like praying to God that I could just nurse her back to health. And luckily she's okay now. But so that was wild. And then of course we thought, oh, maybe we're immune, maybe this is a good thing, but there wasn't really, and still isn't, enough information about that. So you can't even really, we didn't really even get to relax after that.
So how is school different? Like, I mean, we know how it is different, but how does it feel going to school on a computer every day?
Don't get as good education.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Think so?
And we don't see friends every day, so that's a little disappointing.
Do you understand why this is happening?
Because there's a virus going around, and it's really dangerous.
And it's been really heavy. I think the online school has been really stressful for all kids, and kind of negotiating how to keep their emotional health going, and how do we socialize enough that they're, having their needs met but not be at risk.
I mean, the government got caught with their dick in their hand. Clearly, they've messed it up completely, and nobody's arguing that. I mean, that shouldn't even be a political argument at this time. I think it's brought reality home to a lot of people and a lot of around the world. I mean, from the kitchen table and families and having to learn at home to kids that have to go to, the local Taco Bell to steal their Wi-Fi to learn, to, the fact that there's like 5 hospitals in India per 10,000 people and they're putting hospital beds in trains. I mean, it's a global shock, and I think that the reverberations haven't even begun to be felt at all, not even close.
It's been a wild ride, but the things that I take from it, there's a reckoning that's been happening, as well as it's been shining the spotlight on health and proactivity, or what it means to be proactive.
Obviously, the first thing is the COVID-19 virus. which we've never had a comprehensive federal approach to this because our leaders completely abrogated their responsibility to do anything. They're still not doing anything in terms of a planned approach and speaking to the nation and explaining to people how serious this is and what they need to do.
Obviously, the COVID situation, the pandemic has devastated every walk of life, especially in my world of performance artist with being an artist and photographer and gallery thing, all that's evaporated temporarily, I hope. And my friends who are dancers and musicians and anything to do with the arts, theater people, they have no venue. They have no outlet. They've been trying to do the Zoom situation with the little phone, but it's so depressing for the viewer to pick up a rectangle and stare at a meaningful performance in a small 2D format that often they're watching this thing taking a shit and like, come on.
Obviously, I'm heartbroken about COVID and the losses that we have with COVID. The tens of thousands of people that have died and more that will be dying. And the people who have lost their jobs, and of course here in the New York metropolitan area, it's not just the arts, but the arts then bring in tourists, and that's one of the biggest financial supports to this whole area. The hospitality industry has basically come to a dead stop. Restaurants are closing. And some of the hardest jobs, even before all this, being a waiter is not an easy job. Being a taxi driver, it's not an easy job, and these people now have nothing. That we have so many losses with COVID.
Still now, but definitely when everything was really raw and heavy with Black Lives Matter and the protests going on here in New York and across the country. That was a really heavy time in our home, and I'm sure many homes. But both my daughters are mixed. My husband's mixed race, and so there was just a lot of reading through all the layers of that. Everybody's kind of personal connection to it, personal experiences. It was heavy. It was sad. It was, my younger daughter, I think, was more scared than anything. She didn't really want to go outside. She didn't want to drive anywhere. She thought my husband would get pulled over and something might happen to him. So she was experiencing it as real fear. And my older daughter was more angry and sad. And, my husband was dealing with everything at work, and he was kind of asked to kind of be the leader in implementing change at the company. So that was very heavy for him, and it was really, and of course that on top of everything else we were already trying to deal with. So it was, I would say, overwhelmingly sad time, and still is, but it was just so raw in all of us at that point. And we were debating do we go to the protest, do we not, but we ultimately thought it was really important to go, and especially for Naya, not to miss that opportunity. We just thought if we didn't, she would regret it and feel bad about that, and that it was a really important time in history that we should all kind of play a role in as much as possible. So a lot of learning, a lot of grieving, and now we have the election coming up. I don't know.
And from my understanding is that that guy, Dr. Ernie Smith, said that the true definition of power was that if someone else defined who you were and had you believe it, they had power over you. I.e., you're a lazy person, and then you're like, oh man, I am lazy. Then that person has power over you. In other words, the influence of their words, depending on how they deliver it to you, can then affect how you would be. So for me, I have a unique vantage point because I am not an American, and I'm not from America, but I'm from Trinidad, who looked at America as a place of opportunity, and we envied those in America because of what we saw. And so upon getting here and then fitting in, race-wise, economic-wise, socially, the things that I was wanted to be a part of, how I fit into the cracks, if you will, into American society, has allowed me a unique perspective because I still, at the age that I migrated to the United States, I had my foundation already from the principles and morals that I learned back in my home country. So that really moored me and grounded me. And so I think that if I was an American, Black American, an African American, that if I knew, not knowing any different, I would say, yeah, it's pretty screwed up. And hope escapes many people.
Now, people think that, they talk about the race riots. They're not race riots. There are no race riots. These are protests that include people from all races and religions, and they're predominantly peaceful protests. They're not riots, okay? And people are misconstruing the idea that these are the same thing and that they are riots. That's what bothers me about 2020 more than anything.
Then there's imagery that I feel that America has been fed or programmed with of these troublemakers. You see it in the movies, you see it in reality television, and when you go into certain neighborhoods, it is performed. So you assume all of what's being told and what you see, and then you go as a police officer or a person in authority, you go in with that. And so then you begin to treat these people in the way that you see them portrayed on television, not knowing them and not understanding why they are the way they are. So when you go there, you're just definitely meeting the visceral response from them, and then it's your job as a police officer to dominate, to control the situation. Therefore, you're kneeling on people and you're subduing people over and above because of what you think you are defending. And I think in that situation, it's a no-win. The Jews say that they don't look at Hitler as a dictator, they don't look at Hitler as, just some strong tyrannical leader. If you ask any Jew who Hitler was, they would say he's the devil. And looking up the term the devil means devaluer of people. And people who devalue you are devils, in a sense, right? And so the Black community has always felt devalued by the white community, but specifically here by the police union or whatever, the majority anyway, as a whole. And that's what Black people fight against, because that's what they see. So when they're in movies and in music, that's what they hear about, forget the police, and that's a nice way of saying it. And, that begins to permeate your being. You see it, and then you see what you see in society, and you can't deal with it. And you're like, wow, they're exactly the way that we've seen them portrayed. So they have that reaction because they don't understand or think. No one's thinking about the other person's family. No one's thinking about the other person's right to live. So they each see each other as they devalue each other.
And it's also interconnected, right? When you talk about the macro issues of the pandemic and social injustice and the election upcoming, they're all so interconnected, and all of it just leaves you with this feeling of such great division. I mean, all three of those have such division to them. You would think the first one wouldn't, in that it's literally just a health issue. But there's nothing. I think what this year has shown is there's no prominent issue in our society, in our culture, in our country that doesn't fall back to politics in some way and division. I mean, even a simple example of pushing people to vote, right, and just the broad movements of ensuring that everyone is registered and everyone's going to go get out to vote. That shouldn't be political. And for some reason, only the left is really pushing people to vote, which just seems odd. More Republicans wouldn't feel like it's important to go out and support their candidate, right? But yet that is such a political issue as well. Anyway, so I think all of these we think about it through the lens of our children and the impact it has on them and everything falling to this divide. And I think that's created a very unhealthy perspective at times. I mean, we've had a debate with our oldest child about the flag and the importance of, feeling patriotic about your country and how much harder that is now because it feels like there's been one side that sort of owned the flag in some weird way when being patriotic and proudly representing America shouldn't be something that falls along political lines.
I mean, speaking of breaking it, Donald Trump could break the election. He tried to tell people in North Carolina yesterday to vote twice.
Yeah, I heard that.
Cockwomble. I mean, if he wins 4 more years, by, legitimately or illegitimately, we're going to be in a fascist, autocratic state. That's the truth of the matter. Full stop, period, end of story.
In terms of the election, I'm just praying that our democracy can be saved. I'm terrified, utterly terrified. And I'm not someone who's historically been into politics at all, so this must be major, is all I have to say, because I'm obsessed, I'm terrified, and it really does, this is different. This is nothing, we've never experienced anything like this before. We've never had to face, to be scared that our freedoms would be taken away. That's a really huge deal.
Everything hinges on the election in November, and even if Biden is elected, it will take us years to get ourselves out of the mess that we're currently facing. But God forbid if Trump is reelected, I think the great experiment may be over. I mean, I really think it may signal the death knell for our democracy.
Well, last year I wanted Trump out, and this year I want Trump out. I feel very confident that my opinions on the need for change. I would say the only thing that is a little worrisome is that fear that's driven, by just the anxiety over the coronavirus is also the same fear that politicians will tap into and try and use that to manipulate the election and hopefully not, but manipulate what they might do after the election. So the whole, concern over the fascist state is, I think, probably a little bit more alarming this year than it was a year ago.
And I'd agree with that. In my own perspective of change, unlike a year ago, obviously there's a lot of choices in the field and I had specific ones, but I was very much dead set I wasn't going to be supporting Joe Biden if he became the nominee. And I think seeing, frankly, more of the reaction from Trump himself in having some authoritarian tendencies, we saw this globally, but we didn't see it as much with our own civilian population. And I think that came out this year. And I think what the damage of incompetency can do, I think was really shown clearly through how the coronavirus was treated. And I do see some things I'd like to see changed. I'm not going to be still content with Joe Biden, but I'm going to be willing to support him because I think the stakes are just too high. And so some of the things I mentioned beforehand of like making sure we have a more human-focused approach, I think is absolutely needed. Rather than trying to bolster institutions to support others, we should be supporting people directly with universal programs like healthcare, as we've clearly seen a need for during the coronavirus crisis, as well as universal basic income to make sure people are kept afloat economically during times of crisis, as well as being able to invest in themselves during times of prosperity. So these are big changes that I'm continuing to fight for, and I would love to see change. You know, Democrat or Republican, we all need to get on board with these values.
So it's this weird situation we put ourselves in as a country, and it's scary. And I think that, yeah, I'm just hopeful that people who would have voted for a different party see the greater good, and end up voting for Joe Biden and Kamala. Because I think, you know, it's 4 years of Joe, but we can't have another 4 years of Trump. There's just no world in which that's a reality. I mean, today alone he tweeted he's going to put Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton on the Supreme Court, right? So as a woman, that's very scary because I think a woman's right to choose is obviously on the ballot. I think LGBTQ rights are on the ballot. Obviously, being a black person in America is on the ballot. And it seems as if the rise up of white supremacy is on the ballot from the other perspective. So I think it's, I don't know how you feel, Greg, but I think it's a dangerous game we're playing right now. So I'm hopeful that things change for the next year, because if they don't, I'm worried about what that looks like.
I would like to see 2020 less as an ending point in people's minds and more as a jumping off point. I think around the world there have been revolutions, changes, pushes forward, most of them progressive, in an effort to build off of what they've done wrong in the past. And I think 2020 for the United States at least was a signal that we've done so much wrong that once something bad enough hit, there was no way to correct it. And so now we have an opportunity to sort of jump out of like the depths of a failure and sort of push it forward, and hopefully in a progressive way. Yes, often you have to hit rock bottom before you push forward. It's too bad you had to do it as a nation, right?
On the bright side, I think people are being highly creative on finding a new way to spin this thing to make it more about the human condition going through suffering, basically, which is, most art is, in some level, very personal and often suffering, and redemption and optimism. I know personally it's been a time of introspection, months of living in your head, and so that's been a good housekeeping thing, simplifying life, food, clothing, shelter, everything seems to be much simpler. Families hopefully have been drawn more close together, or since they're locked together in the same house, it's probably has some other maybe negative things, but we'll see how that turns out.
My takeaway from 2020 is how it's made me reassess the past, call it 40 years, and what a responsibility my generation has for what's going on. That, you know, starting in the 80s when money became so important that it's crowded out everything else, and I feel like it's led us to today, and that my greatest regret, honestly, that sort of the way that we've lived for the past 40 years, because it's brought us to this.
As we're getting toward the end of 2020, people are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and finding maybe a new way. There's a election going on, and every generation thinks these are crucial times, and I guess this one is no exception. But I think all will be well. This too shall pass.
The United States has gone through some really dark times and come out of them. So when I'm feeling depressed, as I am almost every day when I read the news, I remember bits of that story, of that history that I've just read this past summer, and think, okay, we have it within us. It may not happen quickly, but I'm going to choose to believe in greater goodness of this country. Because if I don't, then I just, I mean, I'm too much of an optimist to not. I just can't go there and think how bad it really could become.
Like any major world event, it'll just shake the snow globe of our lives and we'll settle down to something different. And that's the one for sure thing about life, is that it changes. Here's my Kermit the Frog.
Oh, you just spilled
And
it.
here's David.